Good evening. So I welcome everyone. It's 5:34 p.m. and I'm calling the February 1, 2022 meeting of the Historic Site Preservation Board to order. May we please have a roll call?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Is Member Rose here tonight?
Yes.
Oh, there
I'm
he
here.
is. I see you. Welcome. Member Miller?
I'm here.
Member Hanson?
Here.
Member Rosenau?
Present.
Member Kaiser?
Here.
Vice Chair Nelson?
Here.
Chair Huff?
Present.
You have a quorum.
Super. May we please have the staff report on the posting of the agenda?
Yes, the agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of the Council Chambers and at the Planning Department counter in accordance with established policies and procedures.
Does the board have any revisions to the agenda?
I'm fine. Hanging in there. It's been.
Oops. Did you hear? Does the board have any revisions to the agenda?
No.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Motion?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Member Miller and a second by Member Rose. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All in, okay. So the motion passes 7-0. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it cannot take any action on items that are not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. Staff, has anyone requested to comment on a non-public hearing item or an item that's not on today's agenda?
We haven't gotten any specific requests to speak, but I see we have many members of the public here who have joined us. And so if anybody wishes to speak on the items 3A or 4B on your agenda, now would be the appropriate time to do so. Any members of the public who are here, if you would like to speak, and turn on your camera and raise your hand and we'll call you in order. Is anybody here wishing to speak on any of the items on today's agenda?
So Jarvis, if you could go ahead and begin your public comment, please.
Thank you. Appreciate you all for having this meeting here regarding historic site preservation. I'm speaking in regards to the statue of Frank Bogart statue, which is located on the property of the City of Palm Springs City Hall. I did read over the paperwork and noticed that, yes, this statue is not a part of the historic part of the City Hall, and appreciate that that's being stated. Just wanted to make sure that that will still be moving forward with the statue being removed. I appreciate the time to talk, and that's it. Thank you.
Other speakers? Anyone else? Please raise your hand.
Pearl Devers, if you could go ahead and begin your comments, please.
She's on mute.
Ms.
Thank you very
Devers?
much. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of the Palm Springs Section 14 survivors, and I am definitely speaking. I just want to bring up one point. I want to keep into consideration that if something or someone did something that harmed you, your family, and your home, would you support viewing that statue in front of your place where you paid rent or had any kind of contribution made toward that? And so I'm here in opposition against the statue, and I just wanted to speak that on behalf of the Palm Springs Section 14 advisory group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Devers. Mr. Evans, if you would go ahead and begin your public comments, please.
Good evening. You might want to explain to people before I start, how do you raise your hand? Because every computer screen is a little bit differently, and there are people that probably want to talk and they're not sure. But with that, good evening. And my computer, where my printer broke, so I have to use my laptop to get to my notes. Good evening. I've practiced environmental planning and historic preservation for 34 years in both Palm Springs and La Quinta. Friends of Frank Bogart have submitted written comments from our attorney, hundreds of public comments, and I have submitted detailed comments tonight, which I think you have. The historic resource assessment that you asked for regarding the City Hall site and the statue was not completed. ARG is an outstanding consulting firm. They were tasked with supporting the staff findings and did not provide the information that you asked for. ARG did not ignore the statue and the artist completely. ARG made a very strong statement in finding that there has been no evaluation of the historic merits of the statue or the creator of the statue as of January of this year. The report did not address any of the historic aspects of the statue, the artist, or the man who was subject of the statue. ARG chooses its words very carefully. I've worked with them for the city of Palm Springs. Your historic preservation ordinance has a wide range of resources that are considered potentially historic: cultural, social, political, and architectural. City Hall is more than just a building. It is the people that conducted public business. They also have a standing in Palm Springs history. There's a separate provision of the ordinance for the art. The artist who created the statue is world famous. The art piece was paid for by numerous citizens of Palm Springs. We hope that the HSPB sees through the issues, and you're the trusted advisors of the history of the community. Historic sites, historic works of art, and the very people who found this city. The city staff report tries to use a categorical exemption. Clearly the removal of a significant resource from a historic site does not meet the definition of the exemptions. Removal is removal. Such a determination must be supported by substantial evidence in the record. Please do not rubber stamp a political decision that affects a Class 1 historic site. We ask that you deny the certificate of appropriateness or continue the item again and ask for a complete historic site assessment that addresses the City Hall site, the statue, and the artist who created it. Thank you very much. You're in a very awkward position, as is the community regarding this issue, but I do appreciate your hard work and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Alvin Taylor, if you would go ahead and begin your comments, please.
Yes, hi, my name is Alvin Taylor, and I'm here on behalf of Section 14 survivors. I'm a member of that group and support the opposition that's against the statue. I support the removal of the statue and would like to hear more about concepts and ideas about where it's going to be moved. or whether it's just going to be abolished altogether. But the fact is that I'm totally against it, because I'll never forget the extremely traumatic cowardice act of our families being herded like cattle and treated like animals as we were extracted from our place of residency on Section 14 with no place to go and no relocation fees to get to where we're going. And to look at a statue with a man who had a lot to do with that happening is just, it makes me cry every time I pass by and see it there. So I hope that we will get moving and do something about it. And I also would hope that you would check with the various different people that are opposing, that we would figure out together where it's going to go, if it's going to be abolished all together or put in a museum. We'd like to have a say-so on what's actually going to happen with it. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Mr. Taylor, thank you very much. The participant labeled Jerry's Payne, would you like to offer public comment? You're muted. If you could unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm part of the Section 14 group that has been opposed to the statue being staying located where it is now. I'm part of the families that were in Section 14 during the time of the, when we were asked to, well, we weren't really asked, we were forced to move from the area. My family came to Palm Springs in the mid-40s, and they were part of a large group of people that were staying there, that built homes there, and that were part of Palm Springs, so we thought. But then when we were asked to be removed or forced to be removed from that area by the city councils or whoever was in charge at the time, and I just opposed the statue being there, and I would in favor of having it removed or changed or put it in a different location. Again, I don't live in Palm Springs now. I live in Moreno Valley, but my family has been a part of this movement, and I would like to have some say, and hopefully others in the group would speak up, and that we can be part of the decision that's going to be made on what's going to happen with the statue. Thank you.
Mr. Payne, thank you very much. Gloria Thompson, would you like to offer comments now?
Yes, I would. I'm also a part of the Palm Springs Section 14 Survivors Group, and I also oppose of the statue. I don't know why we would be rewarding someone with a statue that was in charge of such a horrific act anyway. I don't see the big deal in it. And that was in charge of the Holocaust at that time. So I definitely, and I was born there. My mother had 5 children on the reservation, so I'm a long resident of Palm Springs, and I do oppose of it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Thompson, thank you very much for your comments. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Please identify yourself now if you would like to do so.
Hello?
Yes, you may go ahead and offer your public comments now.
Hi, my name is Marjorie Holland. I am a Palm Springs native, and I just wanted to, I am a part of the Section 14 Survivors Group, co-founder, and also a member of Desert Highland Gateway Wellness Committee. And I just want to support the Section 14 Survivors Group in the removal of the statue of Frank Bogert. And I just want to support the cause to take this statue down, period. Thank you.
Ms. Holland, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who wishes to offer comment? Ms. Cerise, go ahead and begin your comments if you would like to do so. Delia Ruiz, would you like to offer comment?
For me?
Yes.
Yes. I am a Section 14 survivor, and I would also like to see the statue removed.
Okay. Ms. Reese, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time?
Yes, this is Ben Mayfield. I'm a Section 14 survivor, and I'd like to also see the statue removed.
Mr. Mayfield, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Madam Chair, seeing that there are no more speakers, you may go ahead and continue the meeting. I would just ask those who are not members of the board to turn off your cameras. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments, and seeing no additional speakers, we will proceed to the consent agenda. So we have the approval of the minutes of January 4th, 2022. Are there any revision to those minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 4, 2022? Motion. Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Rosenau and a second by Mr. Kaiser. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the question. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? Any opposed? Okay, motion passes 7-0. There are no public hearings, so let us proceed to the agenda item 3A, unfinished business. The City of Palm Springs requesting a certificate of appropriateness for the Palm Springs City Hall, a Class 1 landmark historic site located at 3200 East Tahquitz Canyon Way. May we please have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The HSPB considered this item at one of your earlier meetings, and you continued the item requesting further information in the form of a historic resources report to further inform you about the historic significance and characteristics of the City Hall site. That report has been created, and it was provided to you earlier with the packet that you all received. The report was produced and dated January 20th and was done by the firm ARG. The report is summarized, it's attached to your staff report, by the way, but it is summarized as we go through the various findings and analysis on the project. From the ARG Historic Resources Report, on page 2, there are a few items that we had talked about at the last meeting, which through their research has been further clarified. Among those is the period of significance for the building. As they noted, the period of significance for the building is from its date of construction of 1956 through the period when the revision, which included the Emergency Operations Center, was completed in 1965. Those two portions, the original and that addition, are recognized as the historically significant parts of the City Hall complex. And the other parts, which were built in 75 and in the 80s, were done in more of a contemporary style architecture and did not reflect the original architectural significance, which was credited to a collaboration of architectural firms, but primarily is credited to the architect Albert Frey. The report notes on page 13 of the ARG report that there was a flagpole that was originally in the center circle at the entrance, the main entrance to City Hall, which had been relocated approximately around the time that the statue was put on the site. And so it was recognized, as noted there, that those two pieces are not part of the period of significance and therefore are not within that area of the original building scope. On page 3 of your staff report are the defining characteristics, the site and the building. You can go through those. There are quite a long bullet point listed of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. I will just speak to the item on the top of page 3 about the site, which says that the general open configuration and layout of the landscape and hardscape of the building is significant, but it excludes the plant material, the flagpole, and the Bogart statue. A rough chronology of the overall major actions and approvals are listed on the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. And on page 4 begins the analysis for the certificate of appropriateness. And before I go in and briefly summarize these, remember what we are looking at here is the historic resource, which is City Hall. And through the resources report, you learned that the City Hall has primarily been identified as being historically significant because of its architecture, its architect who was working with it. And so the question before you, which is quite narrow in its scope, is to say, by removing this statue, does the historic significance of the building, in terms of those things for which it is identified as being historic, are they materially impaired? So much so that the historic significance of the building, those parts of the building in the site which contribute to its historic significance, would be damaged or removed. And in our review of the findings, which again are on pages 4 and 5 of your staff report, we believe that it does not impair the historic significance of the building. The Bogart statue is something that was placed on the City Hall site well after its period of significance, which again was 1956 to 1965. And the statue was placed on the site roughly in the late 80s, early 90s. So the thing that we're looking at is not to question the value of the statue, the significance of Mr. Bogart, whether it has artistic provenance of its own, but rather what happens when you take this object off this site in terms of the historic site, which is the building. We've not analyzed the criteria of the statue because the statue's historic significance is not in question here. The certificate of appropriateness that you are considering is only to determine whether removal of this object, this statue, does such material impairment of the defining characteristics that contribute to its historic significance that the building is impaired in terms of its historic significance. And through the findings that you see on your staff report from pages 4 and 5, and the information that was provided in the historic resources report, we've concluded that it does not. Those things that are the defining historic characteristics of the building are listed on page 3 of your staff report. And it's really about the architecture and the open space around it. The discussion about where the statue lies within the overall significance of the building in terms of its timing is important. It was put in the City Hall site well after the period of significance. So as the board looks at this, those are the questions in the focus of this particular question before you on the certificate of appropriateness is it impacting City Hall? Not, does the statue have merit? The only question here that we're needing to try to struggle with is, does the removal of this object materially impair the historic significance of City Hall. Okay, so we again are recommending in the staff report that removal of the statue does not materially impair the character defining features or the historic significance of City Hall, which is basically founded around the architecture and the architect and its reflection of the period of significance of the post-World War II period in Palm Springs, when modernist architecture was embraced on all types of building types. So I'll conclude my staff report with those summaries, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon, for that very thorough report. Now it's time for the board to make comments or ask questions for staff. And I'd like to begin with a statement. City Council voted to begin the process to remove the sculpture from in front of City Hall. And part of this process is to discuss and evaluate the sculpture. This new report makes me feel very limited on what we can and cannot discuss. It really limits our review of what may be historic. And in the Historic Resources Report on page 1, section 1.1, ARG states that they did not evaluate the sculpture under any historic criteria at all. But that is what we requested at our November 2nd, 2021 board meeting.
Amen.
History of a city is not just about architecture. I really understand that the cowboy bronze does not go with the modern architecture of City Hall. So why can't we all agree to relocate it along with the rocks to the village green, where it can be reinterpreted within a historical context? Tell the history that has occurred in our city at the village green. This is my recommendation so that we can all get along and resolve this controversial issue. But I would like to invite other members of the board to please give your comments or ask questions. This is the time for other comments. Okay, member Steve Rose.
Yeah, I agree with Catherine's statement. I think that we asked for a report and it was completely lacking in what we asked for. I don't think there's, to not deal with the statute, it is very limited. They've narrowed the issues. It's not a historic resource report that we asked for. And I would like either to have it redone or not weigh in. I mean, the Arts Commission decided not to weigh in on this. And again, I have grave reservations that this is even within our purview.
I would like to just clarify something for the board as you're going through this deliberation. The question before the board and the responsibility of this board is to consider certificates of appropriateness for the alterations of Class 1 and Class 2 historic sites. That is what you're tasked with. It is not the task of the Arts Commission to do that, is the HSPB. And we are not studying or analyzing or considering recommending a historic designation for the statue. That could occur if somebody wanted to submit an application seeking to have it designated as its own historic object. But that's not the question before you. The question before you is, does removal of this object from the City Hall site materially impair the historic resource, which is City Hall, not the historic resource, which is the statue? The statue is not the question about its historic merit. It's the question about City Hall. and whether removal of this object impairs that historic significance.
Member Kaiser.
I hear you, Ken. However, this issue is going to be interpreted by the public, and this vote is going to be interpreted by the public in a much broader sense.
Yep.
And I do not believe that we can remove that from our deliberation. And if the public feels this strongly about it one way or another, it should either be a city council decision, or it should be put to a vote on a ballot.
I agree.
Okay, Vice Chair Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have to concur with the comments that are being made so far by fellow board members. And just to say that this ARG report feels one-dimensional to me, with so much focus on the building and the architecture rather than the site. And it's worth noting that in section 2, where they talk about the administrative background, they say that the 1996 designation of City Hall as a Class 1 site did not identify character-defining features or elements that contribute to the site's historic significance. But in 2012, the City Council partially addressed the issue by adopting an official resolution, which specified that the Class 1 designation for City Hall was amended to include the structures, features, and land. So my question to you is that statue not a feature of the entire site?
Of course it is.
I would feel that it is a feature, and by that nature, it is almost, in my opinion, it seems almost as if it would be a Class 1 historic site within a Class 1 historic site.
Yes,
so,
but Member Nelson, it's not. Member Nelson, it's not. The statue was added to the site. It was never identified in the original designating resolution. It was not identified in the 2012 resolution. It was not identified in the nomination that went to the National Register. So I understand your concern, but again, this is not a question about the historicity of that statue. The question is around, and the reason that the whole thing has been questioned is that this City Hall is a site. It's historic, and it's historically significant based on its architecture. So yes, there are many objects, there are many things on the site, but the question before you is, do all of those things on the site, whether they're trees, sculptures, other things, contribute to its historic significance? That's really the question, is does the statue contribute to the historic significance of the building? And the report suggests that it does not. And the earlier information from the earlier designations makes no mention of the statue.
Thank you, Mr. Lyon. I understand all that, and I appreciate your clarification. A further concern for me is that this report has been done after a Class 1 designation. So why wasn't this type of a report done before two different designations, the original one in '96 and the resolution in 2012?
Because
this
the
is like
city
an
council
after-the-fact thing that you're trying to, between the staff report and the historic resources report, you're trying to create what the character defining features are after the fact of the designation. And that's what I have an issue with. It's confusing to me because we've never had a situation like this.
Well, sure, and I can help kind of clarify that. When the City Hall was first designated, the requirement for identifying character defining features was not there, nor was it there in 2012 when the council expanded or amended the designation. As you know, it was only with the amendments to the Historic Preservation Ordinance in 2019 and 2020 where the requirement for character defining features in the resolution was added. So we have a history in many of our designations that have no information about character defining features or contributing features. That was what I understood was the material that you were seeking, is to understand more clearly what are the character defining features of the site.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate that. That makes sense. I would like to just further say that, you know, I am a little disappointed that there wasn't more information in the report about the actual statue like we asked for. That's unfortunate. And that this issue has really become no longer about history, but about politics. And it's quite unfortunate. Furthermore, the City Hall site has been there for, you know, 65 years, and that statue has been there for half that time. So as long as I've lived here, that statue's always been a part of the site. And for a historic resources report to only talk about a building and not the site, I get it. And to also say that the period of significance is only up to 1965 seems to only focus on one dimension, and that's the building dimension. Because as a site, it has so much more to it. It has the context of the culture and the people. City Hall is an ongoing historic and cultural resource. And I realized the building significance is a certain period of those 10 years or so when Albert Frey was most involved. And I get that, I appreciate that very much. But my feeling is that because of the nature of it being a place where governance occurs and the City Hall itself, the people of the city, that it is an ongoing cultural resource and historic site. So that's where I have a problem with the one-dimensional aspect of both the staff report and the historic resources report. I don't dismiss them, I don't unappreciate them, I'm just pointing that out. And that's really all about, I have to say at the moment, so thank you.
So and I would just clarify that the report that was created by ARG did include discussions and dialogue and analysis of the site as well as the building.
Okay. Are there other comments from other members? Member Miller.
Yeah, I first want to start by saying I have a great deal of respect for all of my fellow board members. You all bring a wonderful set of experiences to the board. And so I hope you don't take any of my comments that might be disagreeable to you for anything more than having a difference of opinion. I have a great deal of respect for all of you, and I want you to know that. The HSPB is not in an awkward position, as at least one speaker tonight stated, and I think some board members perhaps feel that too. Some would like us to feel like we're in an awkward position because that benefits them in their position, which is rooted in politics and not a simple decision. This is a relatively simple decision. Does the removal of a 1990 statue materially impair the 1950s and 1960s City Hall architectural jewel? I say no, its removal does not materially impair nor adversely impact the historic resource of City Hall. Now, I have been on the Historic Preservation Board for less than 1 year, I admit, but in that time, I have seen many historic properties that have been altered with additions built long after the original structures have been built. I have also learned of additions to many other historic resources that came before the Historic Site Preservation Board in years past. In no instance can I recall a much later addition that was found to be contributing to the original historic resource. And these are actual building additions to the original structure, not, as in the case before us, a statue placed out on the lawn. So for me, it's very easy to come to the conclusion that removal of this quote unquote addition, which is a statue placed on City Hall grounds in 1990, will not have significant adverse impacts on the City Hall historic resource. I do understand and appreciate, however, the history of the man that this 1990 statue depicts, and hope that the city will ensure relocation to a suitable site so that Mr. Bogart's historic legacy can live on Mr. Bogart's historic legacy, however, whether you feel it's positive or negative for the city, is not reduced, in my experience, to a simple bronze representation of his physical image that was created in 1990. That's my statement for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Miller. Do we have any other statements? Member Hanson?
Yeah, thank you. I intentionally waited for everyone else's comments because I was anticipating some differences of opinion. And ultimately, I have to say I agree with Board Member Miller. I think that the report did provide information about the entire site and identified what is contributing and non-contributing. And again, in terms of what this board is charged to do, I agree with the findings of the staff report and the consultant report that this removal of the statue will not impact City Hall as a Class 1 historical resource. But I do have a question for Mr. Lyon. Are there any plans or anything you can share with us about the relocation, or is there been no decisions in that regard as yet?
I have not heard any information about the relocation or the disposition of what they plan on doing with the statue.
Okay, I do think that Chair Huff's comments were pretty interesting regarding, a possible place for relocation and interpreting the history of this individual. Maybe revise it and tell it a little bit more honestly. There are obviously some good and bad elements of that, but it's one of those things that it's not a new struggle in historic preservation to be looking at things that have a varied history and revising interpretations of the history to be more accurate and sensitive, in this day and age. So I approve the staff recommendation. I would approve.
Thank you, Member Hanson. Are there any other comments or questions that any of the board member? Yes, Member Kaiser.
Yes, getting away from the politics in this. The Natural History Museum in New York City will still be the Natural History Museum without Theodore Roosevelt in front of it. The square in Charlottesville without Robert E. Lee will still be the square, and it will still be home of the UVA. And with or without the statue, our City Hall will still be our City Hall. So I'm on both sides of this issue.
So, okay. Well, before I go to Vice Chair Nelson, in response to Member Kaiser, so is it correct that the City Hall's historical character is not affected if the sculpture stays in place?
To me, it's not affected if it goes or if it stays in place. It will still be our City Hall.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Vice Chair Nelson.
Yeah, I just want to say that I forgot to mention earlier that I do support the statement that Madam Chair made, very much so. And I do think that it is entirely acceptable for the statue to be relocated to the Village Green, in which it will be much appreciated and promoted by the Historical Society. So it would be a good fit there. They have expressed interest. And I think it would be wonderful because Frank Bogart was very much involved with the creation of the Village Green. So they can help to tell that story with a commemorative plaque there. My only concern that has just now kind of popped up in my head is that the Village Green is a city-owned property. So would we perhaps counter resistance again from the same opposing voices in the city to having this statue of this man on city property? That's one of my big concerns, even though I think it's the perfect location. So I think we need to be very careful as we move forward in making recommendations or agreements about where it's relocated to until we get a full answer from the city or the city attorney, or, you know, maybe they don't have an answer, but perhaps they have an opinion about whether it should be moved to city property or not. Now, one of my questions is already answered because I realized that it is a piece of public art and that it's owned by the city in public trust. So that's another cog in the wheel that I think we need some clarification on.
Mm-hmm. So Member Vice Nelson, so it was, donated to the city of Palm Springs in public trust, and it belongs to the city of Palm Springs, and it should be on city property. It's really unethical to place it relocated on private property, and it can be reinterpreted. It's part of our history, and it needs to be told, the story. And the Palm Springs Historical Society has agreed to tell that story and to reinterpret it. So I am supportive of its relocation. I'm not supportive of removing it and putting it into storage. That I can't do that. Now, Member Rose, you're waving to me a lot, so please take it from here.
Yeah, I just wondered. I think it's an interesting solution. Can we condition our agreement to the City Council's decision on the removal and placement in Village Green?
Well, again, you can make a suggestion or a recommendation within your motion, but the question before you is not about the statute. It is not about where it gets relocated. It is not about whether it goes on this piece of land or that piece of land, or whether it goes down by Bogert Trail, the street. The only question before you is, if you take this thing away from the City Hall site, does it diminish the character defining features of the City Hall site? So you may make suggestions. You may make suggestions to the City Council that would, perhaps help ameliorate so much of the public concern about this. But ultimately, your task is not to find a new home for the statue, but rather to determine whether the removal of the statue from City Hall is something that would impair the historic significance of City Hall, as we've identified what the character defining features are.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
So we cannot discuss what may be historic. We can't discuss other historic criteria. I'm just not really comfortable being limited to one aspect. I would not support this under those circumstances, because history is not just about architecture.
Well, what you would be determining is whether or not you agree with the professional reports that have been prepared for you about what makes City Hall historically significant. That's really the question here. What makes City Hall historically significant? What has been recognized all these years that it has had significant historic designation? It's been about the architecture. It's been about Albert Frey. It's been about the mid-century period that it so strongly reflects. It's been silent on the question of the significance or non-significance of the statue that's there. Just like there are many other things on different historic sites, those that are owned by the city and those that are privately owned. You can take away something from a site. You can add something to the site. The board regularly considers this question. If I take something away or if I put something in, does it change the historic significance of that particular historic site? That's the question before you. So it can go as broadly as you'd like to consider it. I'm not limiting you in terms of that, how you answer that question, but the question really is still not about whether you love Frank Bogart, you love the statue, you feel it's art, or you don't feel it's art, your question is about what's happening to this historic site, which is City Hall, if this thing is removed. That's your question. Now, if you come back and say, I disagree with the identification of character-defining features that the professional consultant has determined, certainly that's within your purview to disagree with. You could say that we don't agree with the Historic Resources Report, and we believe that the statue is, character-defining in some way. You could make that assertion and discount the entire Historic Resources Report. It's been done before.
Member Kaiser.
How do we craft something that we can say that we're willing to let it go from the City Hall site and that it should be on the village green? How do we can't? That's the problem.
Well, you can make a recommendation. You simply can't make it as a condition of approval.
Let me finish, please.
Sorry.
I think this should go back to the city council.
I agree.
And they should say, okay, we hear you, we want to remove it, and this is our decision of where it should go. Under those circumstances, I think we would all be in agreement and we could solve this issue very simply, rather than debating all of these other merits, which really do become weeds. I agree, Ken, with exactly what you're saying with what we are tasked to do. But because this is a much broader and a politically charged issue, I think it's up to the city council or a vote of the people to say this is where it goes. And under those circumstances, I would support this.
I think that's a great motion. Why don't you make that motion?
Well,
saying that we're
how do you make that down into 12?
Well, I think we are deferring our statement until we understand where they are going to be putting this statute.
Okay.
Just like we deferred before, because we were waiting for this report. We needed more information. We need even more information now. We're sending it back to the city council to know where it's going.
So is that a motion, Member Rose?
Well, it's Mr. Kaiser's motion.
Oh, Mr. Kaiser.
I would accept that as a motion.
Would you clarify that so I can understand it? Because I want to just offer something, because I'm sorry I interrupted you, Member Kaiser.
That's all right.
The point that I was trying to say to you is, yes, you can make suggestions and recommendations in the motion that you may choose to make tonight. You may choose to say, as you were paraphrasing, we're okay with removing this thing from this site. We will grant the certificate of appropriateness to remove it. However, we strongly recommend, because there's such public concern about this particular object, that its location be placed in another piece of city-owned property, and that the full interpretation of Mr. Bogart's legacy be characterized in that new location. You could certainly make that as a recommendation. It simply wouldn't be as a condition of approval. Does that make sense?
It does, but the recommendation scares me because I don't know that that has enough teeth.
Well, you can craft your recommendation however you feel comfortable with it.
But that's not what Member Kaiser's saying. What he's saying is, we are not going to.
No, he just froze.
No.
Member Rose, you've frozen up.
At a bad time.
Isn't that what you're saying, Mr. Kaiser?
You broke up completely, Mr. Rose. Could you try repeating that again?
So please restate, Member Rose.
I'm just understanding, Mr. Kaiser, which I completely agreed with, that we're going to defer our decision on this until we have more information on where the city council is going to put this. Okay. I think it puts our commission in an untenable position, in a political position. And in my opinion, and I feel like an integral part of this is knowing what they're going to do with the statute.
Okay.
I would just offer, keep in mind that
saying.
wherever the statute goes doesn't influence. Wherever the statute goes does not influence the question before you about City Hall.
Okay.
Member Miller.
Yeah, I've just got to say, if we're going to attempt to defer this decision until we know where the statute is going to go, that's putting us as the board in an awkward position. And nothing else is putting this board in the awkward position. As staff member Lyon reported out, as the professional ARG report states, this is a simple issue about will the relocation or removal, in the case of the word removal is relocation, of this statute from City Hall grounds material affect the historic resource of City Hall? That's the simple question we need to ask. It should not be affected by where the statue is going to go. I'm certainly supportive of including in a motion that we encourage the city to find a suitable location that is publicly accessible. I don't know that it has to be public property. I know Chair Howe said that that it should be on city property since it was donated to the city, but I don't know if that's a requirement. I think the legal, writings can be put in place that would ensure public accessibility, even if it wasn't on city-owned property. And I think, again, not in the board's purview, that's probably the safest thing for the city as a whole to do. But again, that should not be in our motion. But I do support that that we encourage the city to relocate it to a, always publicly accessible site. And to suggest otherwise and to delay this simple issue again is just, it's ridiculous.
Okay, I have a question. Is it correct that the City Hall's historic character is not affected if the sculpture stays in place? Could you answer that, please? Mr. Lyon?
I'm sorry, you were asking me if the City Hall?
Okay, I'm saying, is it correct that the City Hall's historic character is not affected if the sculpture stays in place?
Let me turn around and answer the question by posing a question. In almost all of your designations that this board has made, the current sitting board and past boards, you often encounter sites on which there have been non-supportive, non-complimentary, sometimes awkward, you could even say ugly, additions and things that have been put on historic sites. And what normally happens is when something gets designated, when you do recognize these things, and we have been doing it now since the new ordinance came into play, we basically write, and you've seen this in some of your past recommendations, that those changes that have been made up to this point are deemed acceptable. That's not necessarily saying or making an opinion about whether it contributes to or detracts from, but merely we recognize it's there. So does leaving it in place materially impair the defining characteristics of City Hall? The answer is no, because when you look at the list of defining historic characteristics on the site, the statue has no place and no part of it. So could it materially improve the integrity? Keep in mind, now we're talking about distinctions between historic integrity and historic eligibility. So would removal of the statue improve the historic integrity of the City Hall site? One could perhaps conclude yes, because if you go back to 1956 to 1965, the statue wasn't there. So if you were to remove the statue, does the City Hall become more like it was during its period of significance? The answer is yes. But does the statue as it sits there damage the historic significance of City Hall? I think the answer is clearly no, because it's not affecting any of the character defining features that contribute to City Hall's significance as a historic resource. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And okay, Vice Chair Nelson.
Yeah, before we make a decision to whether the relocation of the statue is appropriate or inappropriate to the historic site, I would just like to thank all the speakers that spoke tonight. And for those speakers that don't know, I'm a born and raised Palm Springs native, and I have friends of all backgrounds, races, nationalities. So I support everything that you have said, and I understand where you're coming from. And we are just here because we have been tasked with protecting the historic sites of the city, and that's why this has become such a difficult and charged item and discussion for many, many months. So thank you for listening to that.
Okay. Mr. Lyon.
I might also add, I had mentioned this during your first consideration of this, but I did mention it to the record earlier. But as you know, you have also received, in addition to those people who are taking the time to participate here today, you also did receive a number of written public comments that came into the city prior to tonight's meeting, and those were all forwarded to you as well.
Yes. Okay, any other comments from any board members? Member Hanson.
I would just support Board Member Miller's suggestion to grant the certificate of appropriateness for the removal, and to, whatever word we want to use, suggest or recommend, make some recommendations on the relocation to an appropriate site. Not anything in particular at this point in time, but I think that's really the most that we can do here. There's really two separate things. It's approval of the certificate of appropriateness, and then making some recommendations for what's going to happen to the statue from this point forward. But I don't think we really have any say in where it goes specifically or what happens to it once it's off the site, the Class 1 site.
Okay, any other further questions or comments? Is there a motion? May I have a motion?
Mr. Lyon has a comment.
Comment?
Mr. Lyon.
I just wanted to augment what you were commenting there, is that what you're beginning to sort of frame out, I think, may represent a reasonable balance between recognizing the concerns of the community and recognizing the difficult task before you. If you were to say, this is the decision that we want to make on the certificate of appropriateness, and we would make the following recommendation that if the statue is to be removed, and remember, the city council hasn't fully decided to remove it. This is part of the fact-finding information that they are seeking in order to make an informed decision. So if you were to make a decision on the certificate of appropriateness tonight and include a recommendation along the lines of what members Miller and Hanson said, that you recommend that the statue be relocated to a place that's publicly accessible, where there's an ability to fully interpret the legacy of this person, might be totally appropriate, and actually might be one that the council would perhaps appreciate, because it does help to sort of reflect what you're hearing in terms of public comment.
Okay.
Chair, I would make a motion if you want to hear one, and we can see if we have a second. I'll make an attempt to bring everyone's comments to the extent that I believe they should be together. So if you'll permit me, I would make a motion.
What is your motion?
I would move that we approve the certificate of appropriateness for the removal of the Bogart statue with the strong recommendation that the city will ensure relocation to a suitable, publicly accessible site ongoing in the future.
Could we possibly add, oops. All right, sorry, I just muted myself. Could we possibly add something to the extent of move to a suitable site and be reinterpreted? Like, don't get too specific on that, but.
I support that, but I don't know that that's necessary, but.
Okay.
Well, you know, could you name the village green where the historical society is?
Maybe such as?
Such as.
Or recommend the village green where it can be reinterpreted within a historical context?
I think though, if you do that, you might be, I mean, if for some reason that didn't work out, you know, I don't know. I'm more comfortable with such as. I think that definitely makes the point.
Who raised their hand?
Oh, sorry, that was me that said that, Janet.
Okay, and then Vice Chair Nelson.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, question for you, Madam Chair, and also for staff, if it would be appropriate in this motion to add an amendment that a subcommittee of the Historic Site Preservation Board work with the City Council and the city staff to determine the relocation site and the placement and the reinterpretation.
Under what authority would we do that? It's not a.
It's a question.
I wouldn't support that in my motion.
That. Yeah, I don't either.
Mr. Lyon, do you have anything to add to that?
The question that you have is whether or not you make the motion, including a stipulation that a subcommittee be formed that helps participate in the decision of where the statue gets relocated to. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I don't think it's within the purview of this board's work or authority to do so. I think it would be proactive if the board wanted to offer to participate in some way, but I don't think that you should be in a position to impose or require that they include this board or members of it in that decision-making process. But I think it's a fine idea to offer your, if there wants to be a subcommittee that would participate with the city council in choosing a location, you could certainly offer that.
Great. So that being said, who or do you know, or can you tell us who would have the final say on where the statue gets relocated to?
City council.
The entire city council. Okay.
Well, I think that this whole issue should go back to the city council. I don't like being put in this position where we can't discuss the sculpture, because the history of Palm Springs is more about the people and reinterpreting the history, telling the history the way it is. I don't want to risk approving removal and it goes into storage for a couple of years. I'm just uncomfortable doing that.
I agree with that. And, that's what we're doing. Just, I know we have a narrow question and I get everyone's point, but guys and girls, we are deciding whether this thing gets removed with this certificate of appropriateness. We are. And to think otherwise is naive. And I think it's inappropriate and bad for us to be put in that position.
Okay, so that was Member Rose, I think. I recognized his voice on iPhone.
Yes, it was.
Okay, he switched to an iPhone. Okay, yeah. So Mr. Lyon, can you help us?
Well, I'm trying. Well,
there's a motion. There's a motion.
Is there?
There's a motion and a second.
Okay, so Mr. Miller, you have made a motion. If you would restate that, and then I believe that Member Hansen seconded it, but would you please restate the motion?
Sure. Yeah, my motion was to approve the certificate of appropriateness for the removal of the Bogart statue with the strong recommendation that the city, and perhaps that means city council, will ensure its relocation to a suitable, publicly accessible site in perpetuity.
Nothing's permanent.
Right, until another decision is made, but that's outside of our bailiwick.
Okay, so we have that motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, so there's a second motion made by Miller and a second by Hanson. Is there further discussion on this?
Mr. Lyon has a comment.
Mr. Lyon?
I heard somebody say that there was impossible interest in adding the phrase such as the village green into that motion. Is that something that the maker or the seconder are interested in amending, or was that not accepted?
Yeah, I wasn't willing to go there with my motion.
I wasn't sure. I had noted it, but I wasn't sure. Okay, thank you.
So that's not included in the motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call for the question. All in favor of the motion made by Miller, please say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Please.
I oppose.
Opposed? Who opposes?
Mr. Rose.
Mr. Rose, Mrs. Huff. Any other opposed? Okay.
I abstain.
You abstain. Okay, so we have the motion passes. So we have, was that 4? 4 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstained.
Two opposed.
2 opposed.
2 opposed. 2 opposed, okay. So 3 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstained. Nope.
4 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstained.
Okay. Oh yeah, it adds up to 7. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. Are we ready to proceed to new business agenda item?
Madam Chair,
Ryan?
I want to just acknowledge this board because this is probably one of the most difficult decisions this board has been faced with in perhaps my entire tenure here at the city. And I recognize the difficulty with which you all struggled with this. And I thank you for taking the uncomfortable position of taking a position. It is difficult. And I think your motion was a good one that balanced everything that you're hearing as well as your own concerns. So I just want to acknowledge that was a tough one. And you're to be recognized for making a hard decision. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, so we're going to proceed to new business agenda item 4B. This is a review for potential redesignation of a class 4 site to a class 1 or 2 historic resource initiated by application by Daniel Batty, owner, requesting approval to demolish the dwelling located at Smoke Tree Ranch, Rock 12/5R. Staff report or comment about that?
Yes, Madam Chair and the board, this item is on your agenda with a recommendation in the agenda to continue to a date certain of your March meeting. What has happened here is I worked as hard as I could to pull this whole thing together in time for your action on this tonight, but we ran out of time in terms of trying to schedule site visits. And so recognizing that you have not had an opportunity to see the site, I am recommending, even though the recommendation in the staff report was written to take no action and allow the property or the structure to be demolished, I am suggesting that you continue this matter to a date certain of your March 1st meeting to allow staff to schedule site visits for all of you to the site as we normally do with these kinds of applications.
Okay, so we're to receive the staff report and application materials and direct the staff to schedule site visits and continue the matter to a date certain of March 1st, 2022. So may I have a motion to that effect, please?
So moved.
Okay, so we have a motion by Kaiser and a second by Miller. Is there any discussion about that further? Yes, Vice Chair Nelson.
Can you please restate the motion?
Okay, to receive this, well, should I restate it? Okay, receive the staff report and application materials. Direct the staff to schedule site visits and continue the matter to a date certain of March 1st, 2022.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, so any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes 7-0. Let us proceed to discussion item 5A, which is the Preservation Matters Symposium. So our subcommittee, which includes member Vice Chair Nelson and member Kaiser, along with some other members, have been meeting regularly along with Mr. Lyon to come up with a wonderful, meaningful, and worthwhile symposium entitled Preservation Matters, Historical and Architectural Diversity. We've scheduled it for 2 afternoons at the Palm Springs Convention Center for April 23rd and April 24th, 2 afternoons, 1 to 5 p.m. With 14 PowerPoint presentations and panel discussions and a dozen or so on-site visits to significant places in Palm Springs. Deborah Hovel is working with Tom Doyle on the production of the symposium, and they're creating a sizzle, which is a short, upbeat video of highlights that will be complete in probably within the next 2 weeks, and we'll launch our PR and marketing program. Another subcommittee meeting is scheduled for February 15th, and then we're going to do a site visit to the convention center on the 16th. And we have to give a lot of thanks to Dick Perquette, who has continued to help us with the convention center layout and logistics and marketing plan and so forth. So we're going to be able to launch that marketing very, very soon. And Vice Chair Nelson or Member Kaiser, if you would like to add anything to the report for what we're doing, I would welcome that.
We're good.
Okay, we're good. We are good. Okay. So moving along, so that completes today's agenda. And are there any comments from the board? Other comments? Member Hanson?
I just wanted to thank all the members of the symposium committee and Dick Burkett and Ken for all the work that you're doing. I know it's a ton of work to put a conference on, having been on committees in the past. So I personally really appreciate, and I'm sure the community will appreciate all of the work that you're putting in on this. And hopefully it all comes together without, any complications from our friend COVID or our not so friend COVID.
Yeah. Thank you, Member Hanson. Any other comments, Vice Chair Nelson?
Yeah, just checking in with the staff to our concern the last time we discussed this item at our last meeting about whether there's been any direction from the city or the convention center about whether the event can proceed in person or if it's still too soon to know.
It's unfortunately still too soon to tell. City Hall is still closed to the public. Staff is working on being half out of the City Hall building to try to reduce the spread of COVID at this time. Until the council and the city manager gives us further notice, we really don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Member Miller?
Yeah, Chair and Board, I just wanted to say, you all received an email from Ken stating that I was placed on the city's planning commission, and I have been. And I'm looking forward to that, that volunteer work very much. And I've enjoyed my time working with you all, and I've let them know that I'm willing to stay on this board in a holdover capacity, which is allowed until such time that they find a fill-in for my position here, or to the point where I get too busy and have to leave this go. But I did want to tell you at this opportunity that I've really enjoyed working with you, and will continue to do so in at least the month or two coming up. And today's meeting was a little contentious. I apologize. I hope you don't feel that I stepped on any of your shoes personally. I certainly didn't mean to. I have a great deal of respect for all of you. And I hope to continue to work with you in that vein going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And good luck with that planning commission position. So any staff comments? Does staff have any comments?
Yes, I have just a couple of things to report. First of all, I believe I advised you over the past month or two about the work that's occurring at the Bank of America building. I did forward your recommendations on the modifications to the privacy screen at the ATM, and I believe your comments are being incorporated into that to raise the bottom of the screen up and shorten it a little bit. So you should be seeing paint work and landscape work and things like that going on there at the Bank of America building. And as I mentioned to you before, I guess personally, I'm very relieved that we're seeing this finally get painted the correct color. The color that they found was actually found underneath a cover plate of some kind on the outside of the building, which revealed its what its original color was, which was kind of a taupey gray color. So it'll be nice to see that building finally come back into the warm hues that it was originally designed with. The second item I want to bring to your attention is that Member Nelson had asked about the Cork and Bottle building. If you recall, the Cork and Bottle building has its main primary facade, which is basically the three-part facade building with the two side windows and then the vertical part with the clock. And then if you recall, there's a small annex on the north that's attached to the north side of the Cork and Bottle building that is not recognized as being historically significant. However, because it is a component of that site, they went through processing to revise the front facade of that small annex. Well, I drove past there this past weekend and the annex is gone. And so I contacted the property owner and he informed me that during the process of demoing out the inside, the building shell was apparently badly deteriorated due to termite infestations. And when they arrived back on the site, apparently after a weekend, the building was in a state of partial collapse. And so it was removed. And so the good news is that it was not part of the historic character defining features of the Cork and Bottle building. The bad news is that it fell down and it's got to now be reconsidered in terms of what that applicant wants to do with that space. The project that they were working on included a very small addition on the back side of that north annex. So I believe they had like plumbing and everything else already stubbed in for that when this problem occurred. So I spoke with the owner today and we will be having a continued dialogue on how they want to move forward with their rehabilitation of that Class 1 site. But it's something that caught my eye, made me drive around the block twice to realize it was gone. And but apparently he's going to be sending me pictures, which I will share with you as well in terms of what actually happened there. I too wanted to say congratulations to Member Miller, who will be a fine complement to the Planning Commission. He has been a very positive contribution to this board, and as staff, I'd like to thank you for your service here, and I appreciate that you're willing to stay on. I'm doing 2 roles now and 2 positions now. You can too, right? So anyways, thank you for that. I believe that completes my comments. Flynn or David, did you have any comments you wanted to add?
I don't have any comments this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Nelson, last comment.
Just in response to Mr. Lyon's comment about the Bank of America, I have 2 concerns. One being here the proposed re-landscaping to the south side of the building going to be done before the new roundabout? And if so, will it be negatively impacted when they tear up the street to do the construction of the roundabout? The other question, also pertaining to B of A, is in the area in the front that faces the parking lot, there is a historic marker. But then there's also something that looks like it was an opening to a safe or
safe deposit box or a safe deposit after hours.
Yeah. And then there's also another little plaque that says something of like no loitering or trespassing. And then there's a light fixture. So there's like 4 things going on right there, and it's really messy and it doesn't look good. I was just wondering with this repainting, if we could have the opportunity to maybe clean that up a bit around where the marker is located so that it's not detracting from the beautiful historic integrity.
Very good point, Member Nelson. And I believe, my feeble memory serves me, the light fixture on the wall, I think, is being eliminated. And I will definitely forward your recommendation that when those markers and plaques and things are put back on the wall, that we try to get them realigned. I'm assuming they're taking them off the wall to do the paint job, but I don't know that for sure. But regardless, I will make that recommendation to them. And with respect to the landscape on the south part of the building, interestingly, the city did a recent, about a year or 2 ago, accessible sidewalk modification there on the south side, and the landscaping in what is the city right-of-way is currently unfinished. The landscaping that the bank proposed is the landscaping that's on their parcel. Their parcel does not extend all the way to that corner south of the building, but it encompasses about 2/3 of that open space. And so the landscaping on their site is pretty much consistent with what they have right now. It's not a drastic change in any way. It's really taking care of the lantana, getting rid of dead stuff, and filling in things where there were some missing trees and things. I am going to be working with Public Works to look at, I've seen just very conceptual layouts of the traffic circle. And I will be working with them on that. And I told the bank that I would coordinate with them as well, so that when that landscaping is put together, that it's harmonious.
Great, thank you. One more thing to add on that. I appreciate your patience. Growing up here, I seem to recall that as part of that landscaping around the 3 sides of the building, so the west side, the south side, and the east side, basically the point. Mm-hmm. I seem to recall that as part of the landscaping, there was lighting at some point that shone up and highlighted the fact that it was on a plinth or that it was kind of protruding or floating out there. And I don't know if that was part of the original landscape design plan or if that was added after the fact, but I seem to remember it being very cool. Mm-hmm. And highlighting the architecture. So just wondering if you've seen the lighting plan and if that's being incorporated or not.
There was nothing that I saw with respect to architectural lighting of the building. I do recall, and you've all probably seen it, there's an old postcard of the building that's a night shot that, yes, does seem to show some type of architectural lighting on the building when that original screen was on the west side of the building. But I don't believe that the bank has any current plans to put architectural lighting onto the building at this time.
Okay, and I would just add that if they did, it would help with safety and security because we all know that loitering and homelessness has become an issue. So the more lighting they have, the more it would deter that unlikely element.
Good point.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion this evening? Okay, seeing no further discussion, this meeting of the Historic Site Preservation Board is adjourned at 7:04 p.m. To the meeting of Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. So thanks again for all of your participation this evening. We all appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.